Hey, I'm Joy Nkoyo, your host for this podcast. Join me as I delve into the minds of fellow artists and find out about their inspirations, creative process, and personal journeys. This is Noise in the Gallery, a podcast to inspire.
I was taking my laptop into the biome in a bin bag because I didn't want it to get wet, and there's just like ants crawling everywhere, and you're like, I really hope that my device survives this very humid environment. What is your needle pusher for today? Like, what is the one thing you can do to like push the needle towards what your goal is or what your vision is? 50% of our DNA is the same as a tree, which is crazy.
That's mad.
Yeah, and how we're all kind of linked in this evolutionary web.
Welcome to Noise in the Gallery, and thank you for being here. I kind of see you as a really special, unique kind of artist because, like a polymath almost, because you've got really expert knowledge in two different fields, geography and music, right? And I haven't really met any artists or come across any that are able to combine the two in the way that you do. So I think I'm going to learn a lot today because I don't really know much about geography at all. So we met last summer at Sound and Music Summer School.
Yes.
Which was an experience.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like, we basically got asked to run some music workshops for like 70 kids.
17 to, 14 to 18-year-olds.
Yeah,
like
14 to 8. So they were teenagers.
Yes.
And there was 70 of them. So it was quite intense.
It was quite intense and definitely something I'd never done before. And I don't hang out with teenagers that often, so it was a real, not since I was a teenager, so yeah, it was kind of remembering what that felt like and being on the other side of that as the facilitator. So yeah, it's definitely different to leading a workshop with adults, I think.
So let's talk about the last year, sort of what you've been up to. You haven't been releasing music very long properly, right? No. All your music started coming out last year pretty much. So you released a few singles and an EP. So maybe we should talk about like your journey getting to that point, because someone of your knowledge and ability doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It'd be nice to get some context around your journey. So could you paint a picture of like your childhood for me?
Yes, yeah. So I was actually born in Brixton in London. Right. And then my parents moved to the countryside when I was about 3.5. And my mum is in the environmental sector, and my dad was a stay-at-home parent, and he loves music and was always putting on loads of different artists. So I was born to Brian Eno, to his ambient music for airports. So I came into the world with ambient music, and I love it.
That's so cool and unusual as well.
Definitely. And so growing up, he was always really encouraging us to do music, and my mum was always very encouraging with the environmental stuff. And we, as a family, I think music and being in like nature, and that was always, those two things were always very important, I think, for me and my brothers. And yeah, so from there, I always knew I either wanted to go into the environmental sector or the arts. Those were the two things I was kind of wrestling over growing up. And when I was a teenager, I started writing songs, and me and my brothers would make songs on GarageBand. And I
read that you released your first album at 7 to your family. Is that true?
That is true. I had a few albums at that age. One of them was
nauseating.
Were they good? I don't know. One of them was literally just taking all the loops, like the sample loops on GarageBand, and just like looping them over and over again, and then claiming to my dad, like, yeah, I made all of this. This is all me. And he's like, where did you get these drums from? Like, I don't think you did make this. And then others were just, singing into the like computer microphone and like stacking up harmonies and stuff, but like the metronome being out of time and everything. So it's maybe my rawest work, but I don't know. I don't know if it's any good. But yeah, it was quite nice, like being encouraged from that age to make music, even if it, wasn't. It was a kid's music.
So you say your mum was involved in environmental studies. You were born in Brixton, did you move to the countryside? Was that a big part of your life then, or?
Yeah, so we moved to Kent, and
Okay.
we lived kind of in the middle of nowhere, so it was quite far to the nearest town, which I think was both a blessing and a curse at times. Like, I think as I was when I was a teenager, it was quite hard to like go and see friends, and so either I'd have to like organize it with my dad and be like, "Can you give me a lift to this station at this time?" Or I think as a result, it meant that sometimes I would just be kind of at home and twiddling my thumbs a bit and maybe making music or watching YouTube for
It can
hours.
foster creativity though, like all
Yeah.
that time spent in your own thoughts, in your own world.
Yeah,
Do you think
definitely.
that helped you kind of become quite a creative person?
Yeah, I think so. And it meant that I was engaging in hobbies quite young. And I feel like also just walking around in the countryside, I think once I got past the age where walking felt like a chore, like going on a walk with my parents, I was like, I don't want to go on a walk with you guys. But as I went through my adolescence, that became something I really enjoyed, and actually going on walks in the countryside and like exploring the fields around near where I lived, that became something I love to do.
It's funny that like you never quite rebelled in that teenage way, or maybe you did and sort of came back to it. I think are your parents really proud of that? The fact that you've sort of kept their interests going in a sense.
Maybe, yeah, I think so. And I think my dad has always been like, while I've been self-employed, he's always been someone who I've called up fairly regularly and just like chatted about stuff with. I think like when you're self-employed, you don't have a boss, you don't have someone who you can like report to regularly. So my dad has kind of taken a role of like sort of like a mentor sometimes, which is nice. And or at least someone to bounce off ideas with. Even though, yeah, I think obviously the world has changed a lot since he was my age. So sometimes like maybe his advice isn't as relevant to what I'm doing at the time, and then we can talk about that and I'll be like, no, I think it has changed, like the world has changed in these ways.
Yeah. It's funny that like there's still those little things where your parents don't get certain things. I think that's a
Yes,
universal thing.
definitely.
But it must be really nice to sort of have his support
Yeah,
and yeah, that relevant knowledge.
for
Yeah,
sure.
that's really cool. So, what were you like at school? And something interesting about you is that you went on to study geography at Oxford.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is huge. So, yeah, how was that progression, sort of deciding what you wanted to do in an academic sense?
Yeah, I think at school I was quite bookish, I think, and
Surprise!
I wasn't always. I think I always had like one friend at school at various stages of like my school time. We would just be like a little duo who'd go around and like be very silly. So when I was very little, it was my friend Ruya, and we started like a imaginary religion at my school and like got all the kids to sit down and like meditate with us. And then in secondary school, it was my friend Emma, and we used to mess around quite a lot in class. So there was like this balance between kind of wanting to do well, but also wanting to be quite silly and
Do things
creative,
your
I
own,
think.
yeah, your own way.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. And again, maybe that sort of is the balance between like arts and wanting to be kind of creative and push against some of like the more rigid structures of school, I think, but then also like having an interest in geography and sciences. And I think yeah, one of the things I was looking at for university was the more kind of liberal artsy kind of structure that is in America. I think there's like one course in at UCL that's arts and sciences that kind of covers those two areas, because I think I've never been like a specialist. I don't think I there's never been one thing I'm like, I want to go into this into loads and loads of depth. I think I prefer like doing a little bit of everything.
But also seeing how they interlink, and I think
Yes,
that's
yeah.
what's really cool about your practice, whatever that involves. I do think you're able to see how all these things can interconnect in a different way to what I would see, right? And that's really cool. But yeah, it can be hard when you're trying to navigate that formal structure of education. I
Definitely.
think in the UK in particular, we kind of really separate out the subjects in a way that, I don't know if you know of IB and stuff.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
these kind of approaches of actually having a broader sense of study is unusual here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think actually my mum was one of the first pupils who did the IB, so she got
Oh, really?
a scholarship to go to this like college in Canada, where it was this quite out there thing at the time, where they had a group of students from all around the world who all got a free education in this place on Vancouver Island
So
called
cool.
Pearson College. And I think I might have this wrong, but they were like the 5th year to do the international baccalaureate. And I think, yeah, getting that, maybe my mum talking about that and her experience at that age, suddenly like getting out of the English school system and being among like people from all different cultures and doing this sort of interdisciplinary course. I think that kind of thing always seemed quite enticing. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, so when you did go to Oxford, how did you find that? What did you study? Was it more practical or theoretical, or a nice balance?
Yeah, so with geography is quite a strange subject these days because it covers so much. So you can do economic geography, you can do social geography, environmental geography. There's the physical geography world, which I didn't go as much into, but it could be anything from like talking about biodiversity. I guess there was a bit of that in the environmental stuff, but also like the classic rocks and rivers that you think about, and it gets very scientific and mathematical like the further you go down that route. So it was this sort of interdisciplinary course where it covered so much about the world, and you could kind of pick and choose the bits you were interested in at that time. So yeah, it was a lot of essays to the point where I'm like, the thought of doing another essay in my lifetime is kind of terrifying.
Never.
Yeah, and then I said that to someone, they were like, but don't you kind of like, you do that through writing, I don't know, like when you're thinking of like an EP or like you're writing funding applications.
It's a
like,
thesis, right?
Yeah. And I was like, okay, maybe I do, maybe like it's like that is still a part of your life as a creative, and like the research you do behind the scenes.
More fun though.
It's a lot more fun. And you're doing it for like, yeah, what you're passionate about. Not that I wasn't always passionate about those essays, but a lot of the time it's just like, can you argue these points? So I think the bits I really loved about Oxford was like all the stuff that was going on around the outside of the course you did. So I got quite heavily involved in the music scene.
Yeah, I was going to say, because there are some videos on YouTube. I did some digging.
Oh, no.
like a baby Alice, and you look so cute. And you're with, like, a band, and I think it's, like, a live session that was, I don't know if it was directly through the uni, but, yeah.
I think the thing about Oxford, so they have so many things that just spring up out of students. So a lot of that stuff was just student-run. So there was this particular thing called Vulture Sessions, which was just I think originally it was just 2 students that were like, we're going to make some music sessions and get different artists from around Oxford to do them. And then that then got passed down to a new group of students. And that was quite often the way. So I was also part of the theatre kind of world in Oxford a lot too. And they were just theatre groups that would spring up out of, someone would be like, I want to be a director or a writer, and then they'd kind of assemble their group around them. So there were some structures in place, but I have no idea how they were funded or like where that money came from. But it was like kind of separate from the university, like colleges itself, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you kind of were dipping your toes into theatre. Didn't you, I don't know if this was after you left, but you had like a comedy duo? Was it
Yeah.
Drag Kings?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I remembered that.
Yeah.
Was that after you left?
That was after I left. So I think since leaving, my like career has kind of wiggled around quite a lot, and I think this is again the like it's me looking for the place I want to land, and me and my friend Rosa. So I was part of this theatre company for a while, where we were touring after university and going to. I worked in an environmental charity for a bit and then decided to go on tour with this theatre company because I was like, if I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And I can find another office job at some time if I need to. And that was like the start of my freelance journey. And my friend Rosa, she was also in this theatre company, and we didn't know each other really before the theatre company, and then we just kind of clicked and started telling a lot of jokes to each other, and we got really inspired by the clowning community at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and there were so many shows where a lot of time there was this one particular show by a comedian called Natalie Palomides, and the show was called Nate, and she's quite a short woman, and she'd come on with like a fake chest hair, this massive like handlebar moustache and wig, and she'd be this character called Nate, and the whole show was about, it ends up being about consent, but it's just like the funniest like show ever, and using comedy to like talk about an issue that is important, I think at that time for me was a really interesting way to try and maybe start conversations about something. So for Rosa and I, we decided, like, both of us cared about the climate crisis and wanted to talk about it, and we were like, what would a drag comedy show about the climate crisis look like? And so we invented these two characters called Alan and Ron, who were these middle-aged men who would wear Hawaiian shirts and socks and sandals, and they are Foley artists, which is, so Foley is like in, say, post-production in a movie, when you hear like certain sound effects, sometimes they're created in studios where people might have like a celery and they're like cracking it, and that makes the sound of bones breaking,
or like horse hooves or
exactly.
whatever. Yeah, okay.
So the concept behind that particular show was they were doing the Foley for a climate documentary, but were completely clueless, and then like over the course of the show, like loads of weird stuff happens, like they find sand in like all of their like office drawers, and my character Alan starts turning into a plant, and Rosa's character Ron starts taking off loads of layers to reveal more and more Hawaiian shirts, and to the point where both of them can't really adapt any further, and it's like, okay, what happens at that point? So yeah, it was quite a conceptual show, but very, really good, very silly.
Yeah. In the meantime, was music on your mind? Was it always there as like something you knew you wanted to do but weren't sure how to go about it? Like, what was your kind of internal dialogue at that time? Because you say you were like meandering around in your career. Was there ever a sense of like, oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing?
I remember the director of my theatre company, Jack, when we were in our third year of uni, and he said, Alice, you should go into sound design. And I was like, I can't do that. Like, how would I do that? How would I go about that? And it was only through like taking that leap to go freelance with that theatre company, and then creating the space for myself to see if more work would come. And so after that, I started doing more sound design, because I was always doing music and sound design with that theatre company, as well as acting in it at that stage. And then, as after we did that initial show, I just continued doing, like, making music for theatre shows, doing sound design for theatre shows, and that kept building and building. Meanwhile, I was writing my own music, and where I could, I was always trying to, if it felt right for a show, I'd be like, maybe there should be a song at the end, or like in this particular place. And I always used like each project as a chance to learn something new and learn a bit more about Ableton, or for a particular show I might be like, okay, I'm only going to use like the voice to soundtrack this, and it will all be then me kind of tweaking the voice or like manipulating it in certain ways. So that was that first year or so of just working in theatre and like on different projects was such a useful time for me to kind of experiment with different genres, learn a lot about like different tools, and yeah, I think learn a lot during that time, which I think was important after having studied geography and not focused on music as much.
Yeah. You know, there comes a point where was the Eden Project like the first solo thing that you did? Would you say? Yeah. So there comes a point where you send in that application and this whole amazing project kind of emerges from that. Could you just explain what the Eden Project is and how the whole thing kind of came about?
Yes, so the Eden Project is the world's largest indoor rainforest, and it's in Cornwall. They're now opening loads more sites around, or plan to, I think, around the UK and around the world. And it's this site in Cornwall where they have these massive, like, geodesic domes, like kind of big, I think they're just these massive domes, like are see-through, kind of big greenhouses almost. And they have one that's the rainforest biome, so it's full of loads of tropical plants, and it has a lot of education around like the resources that come from the rainforest, the medicines, the materials, like how the world kind of relies on / extracts from the rainforest, and also the challenges then that the rainforest faces and the importance of caring about it and not completely exploiting it or anything. And then they also have the Mediterranean biome, and they also talk about the importance of the plants there. And it's just an incredible site and organisation. Like, they have so many very innovative ways about talking about the things that are important for ecosystems, and they are not afraid to shy away from like the climate crisis is happening, and these are some ways we can kind of tackle it. So yeah, they're just, as like on one side they are a tourist attraction, kind of like that people go to Cornwall and they'll spend a day at the Eden Project, but they also have this educational side to it where, you know, people might go there to look at the pretty flowers or like the plants, but hopefully they come away like learning a lot more about the climate crisis. So yeah, with that particular project, so before the pandemic I was doing the theatre work, and I was slowly doing more like music and bits of film that were about the climate crisis and exploring that through my music. And then the pandemic happened and all of my work disappeared pretty much, like, because at that time it was so reliant on theatre. And I was already starting to be like, I'm not sure if theatre is where I want to solely work, because it can be incredibly... There are so many amazing people work in theatre, but as an industry, it's hard to work there and make much of a living, I think.
Yeah.
Unless you're at the top of it, where you're producing giant kind of West End shows.
Yeah.
So much of it is quite all-consuming, and it gets to a point where you're like, okay, I'm getting through my 20s now. I don't think this is sustainable. And
being in London as well,
exactly,
where, you know, it's not cheap to be here where the work is as well. And as you say, it's West End and then it's everything else. And if you're trying to sort of follow your nose and things you're actually interested in, that's quite a hard thing to navigate, I imagine.
Definitely. Yeah. And I was finding I was either having to say yes to a lot of projects and not doing any of them like quite I wasn't working on them as much as I would like to, because I was having to juggle so many projects, or I'd just say yes to like one or two at a time, but then you go, oh god, I don't think this adds up quite. So yeah, the pandemic for me was a good chance to sort of reset and rethink about what I wanted to do, and at that point I was questioning, like, is this the point to go back to an office? Is this the point to kind of shift towards something more, I guess, stable? And it was at that point that I applied to Sound of Music's New Voices program, so Sound of Music is the organisation that we did the workshops with, and for anyone listening, is a great place to look for funding and support and opportunities. Yeah.
And meet people.
Yes. And they have, I think they've changed the name of it now, but it was this 18-month program where they support composers to create a new sound or music piece. And I got accepted onto that, I think, around October of 2020. So it was the perfect time for me. It just caught me before maybe I would have chosen to leave the arts.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it's quite funny because some people listening might be like, so you went for music? It's like
yeah, I know.
Stable. Yeah, that's all relative, right? Yeah. I guess within music there's maybe more diversity in terms of like what you can do with the skill set of recording, producing, engineering, being an artist, getting funding, being a composer.
Yes.
If you're broad enough, I think it maybe is more stable. But
yeah, and I'll say I'm definitely learning since then, as I'm trying to do more live shows or produce music. That's definitely the part, release music, that's the part of my career, I suppose, where it is more passion-led, and I know that it probably won't make much money. And so actually with the pandemic, I was shifting quite a lot towards audio, and because I think the theatre world shifted to kind of audio drama at first, because that's what people could still do fairly remotely.
Yeah.
So I did one audio play project, and I was like, oh, this unlocks a whole new world, where I was finding with theatre, I was having to produce a whole hour-and-a-half score or soundscape soundtrack in a couple of weeks for a show, which is just impossible really to do with any detail.
Yeah.
And then with the audio stuff, I was realising, oh, this piece is 10 minutes long, but I'm being paid the same, and I can pour so much more detail into it and really respond to the words or create these sound worlds. And so for me, that was a really exciting moment and shift in my work, where so radio and podcast is a huge part of how my job is currently sustainable. And then the music is something that kind of weaves into that and out of that, and is something that, is more my own personal journey, I suppose, and something that I would love to be more sustainable and a bigger part of the pie, I suppose.
Yeah.
But at the moment, it's something that is more of an investment. I think I do a lot of the other work. I get a lot of enjoyment out of the other work, but it's, some of it is to support that other dream, I suppose.
Yeah. But then circling back to the Eden project, right? So you said that this project, what kind of came out of it was something that really felt like you for the first time.
Yeah.
And that seems like a really cool hybrid of where you get to have your cake and eat it. Do you feel like it was like that?
Definitely. And I think it was the first, because I'd been working so much as a collaborator on other people's projects up to that point. And I really, in the first lockdown, one of the things that came out of it for me was I felt I needed to have at least one strand of what I do be self-led and be my projects. And it just so happened that was music. And so through the New Voices program, I developed this idea where during the first lockdown, I got very interested in artists who were using environmental indicators or data within their music making.
Do you have any names? Because this is a whole world that I have not... I was going to ask, how many people did you feel you could look to? Because it's quite unusual for me anyway.
Yeah, it's quite a niche group, but then as soon as you start looking at it, suddenly a lot more comes out of it. So they're one of the first people I came across through one of the mentors at Sound of Music was someone called John Luther Adams. Pretty sure it's John Luther Adams. He takes data from... He has one piece where he takes data from tectonic activity and then the Northern Lights. And I'm pretty sure this was in Alaska, and he had this like ever-changing sound and light installation that responded live to this data. So
cool.
Yeah, so when the Northern Lights were out, you'd have this like ethereal soundscape, and then when there was tectonic activity, you would have these like deep rumbly bassy sounds. And I just found that really inspiring, like this way of kind of live interpreting the landscape around you and using that to maybe create melodies that you wouldn't have come up with yourself, or different textures and soundscapes. And there's an artist called Jason Singh who was a mentor for me on this project, who he uses this device called a plant biodata device, and you put 2 electrodes on a plant leaf and it passes a small electric current through the leaf, and it takes the changes in conductivity from the plant to this little signal, which changes as water and like salts move around the plant, and it takes that wave of conductivity data, that changing conductivity, and applies it to pitch and applies it to MIDI data.
Right.
So you can put it through a synth or into your laptop, and it's basically this data from the plant is live generating notes. The data is being applied to pitch. And so I was very... Actually, I met him as I'd already found an artist who was doing that, and then Jason, we met each other. And I was like, I'm thinking of doing this project where I take plant data and I make it into music. And he was like, that's so weird. That's literally what I do.
Wow.
So we randomly met at this other residency, and kind of hit it off. And
That's
then he
crazy.
became a mentor for me on that project. But I actually ended up making my own device. So you could buy them off the internet. But with my dad in the first lockdown, he taught me a bit of soldering and electronics. And I was like, oh, actually, you know what? I want to give it a go, like making my own piece of hardware and then using that within the project. And that for me felt like a big challenge. I still don't completely understand like everything I did. I was following these instructions and I was like, yeah, put the capacitor into this hole and it does something.
Like, where did you get the instructions from, though?
Yeah, so there's this guy on the internet called... His name on the internet is Electricity for Progress, and he puts out these schematics and puts out these instructions basically on how to make different devices.
Cool.
This biodata device was one of them. And they're not the easiest instructions to follow. Like, there were definitely points where I was like, I have no idea what is going on, but I'm going to keep going, and eventually managed to get it working. And over the last couple of years... Last year I was commissioned to make one for an installation. So then at that point I was like, I'm going to try making one in like a nice case and like make it actually look good. Whereas before it was
just wires and like...
It was just wires and which also was slightly difficult when going to the Eden project, and this is very humid biome and you're worried about like... I was taking my laptop into the biome in a bin bag because I didn't want it to get wet, and there's just like ants crawling everywhere, and you're like, I really hope that my device survives this like very humid environment. But yes, that was the start of that for me, and this journey into, I guess, making music that has this environmental theme and taps into these topic areas that I'm interested in.
Did you have an idea of how you were going to use those sounds? Because basically it culminated in your EP. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do with them?
Yeah, I think I knew I wanted to use it as the basis for some of the songs in the EP. So some of them, this kind of plant-generated music is more at the foreground. So I have a couple of tracks, one called Imbalance. Can't you see the way out? Someone called Connection. Where the synth sounds and those notes have been generated by the device connected to the plants. And I will say at this stage, the thing I realised quite quickly was this data was gonna, like, it's not the sound of the plants. Like, it's not like I put a microphone on the plants and this kind of magical music has come out. I think sometimes people, like, miscommunicate that, I think.
Yeah.
And that's where I think it can get a little bit dangerous, actually, if people are saying, like, this is the actual music that plants make, and then it's sort of misinformation in a way.
Yeah.
But what it is you're taking this data set and you're interpreting it. So instead of putting it on a graph, it's applying it to notes.
Okay.
And then you can put it into a synthesizer. And at that stage, I was like, I know it's important for me that this sounds nice as well.
Yeah.
So I also applied a scale to it. So it would only play notes within this specific scale. So the plant data was like generating the notes, and then on Ableton, they would be applied to a particular scale. So you could make it sound... Yeah, basically there's a lot of like human interpretation on top of it. And I think for me, it's always been important to communicate that and be like, you know, this is an interpretation of a set of data. Like, this is very much like the human intertwined with technology and plants.
But that's even more kind of real in a way that, you know, because your music is exploring how the two interconnect.
Yeah.
So I think it's important that, you know, you do have your input on that, and it's really nice that, you know, the same person could do the same process and come out with something completely different.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah, and when I was exploring that and being like, okay, what does that mean, like, for me to put this kind of human influence on it, and the thing I came out with is these melodies wouldn't have been produced if it wasn't on this particular plant at that particular time of day. That's the exciting thing, and what the device shows and what the music shows is that there are processes going on inside this plant that we can't see, and it's at a rate that I think it's sometimes hard to feel empathy towards plants because they move on such a slower time scale to us on the most part. And what I think that device allows you to do is to get a window into, oh, there's stuff going on in there. Like, there are processes that are changing this data in real time and at a rate that we can, like, instantly hear a difference in this soundtrack. So yeah, that was quite exciting, I think.
So the EP is called From the Understory.
Yes.
Why is it called that?
I'm not very good at coming up with titles unless they come to me immediately, I think. Like, otherwise it just takes me so long and I'm like, there's so many different options, I don't know. Which is why I ended up releasing music under my own name as well, because I was like, it's just going to take me way too long to think of an artist name. So From the Understory, the understory is the layer of the forest that is from kind of like shrub height to, like, it's basically like the layer that a human walks through. So that was what was important to me. It's sort of, it's been a while since I've searched terms as well. It's not like the like floor, I guess, and it's not the canopy. It's not like the big overstory. Trees. Yeah, right. It's like the part that a human would walk through, and it would be at their eye level or around that height. So for me, that was important. Again, like, the music is the lyrics, and I suppose the process behind it as well is, as we said already, is about like the connection between humans and the environment. And so for me, I wanted it to be about what we kind of walk through every day, what the layers that we would walk through a forest or through the Eden Project, or I suppose it's what we interact with. And I think that was a central idea of the EP, was this idea of, like, in the UK and in the West, there's the mainstream idea is that humans and nature are separate, but from like everything from the bacteria in our bodies, which some people say is up to like 50% of our cells is bacteria or more, and from the food we eat, the air we breathe, we're constantly in flux with the environment around us. We're never like a static thing. And there's something about that, both on just like a like bodily level, but also just how we interact with the world. We're constantly in flow, and we're not separate. Like, what is that barrier? That you can think of it as like, when we're not, there isn't this barrier, because it's constantly changing, or the barrier's constantly changing between human and what is around us.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
No, it does. It makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah, no, I'm genuinely a bit mind blown. Yeah, sort of like, wow. So did you have any sort of collaborators in terms of the sonics, or just the process of making this music? Because it has such a gorgeous, folky sound. You've got gorgeous harmonies and lovely arrangements as well. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. So yeah, did you collaborate with anyone for bits of the recording? Or
I did, and I should also say, when I was making the device, I had a mentor at that stage called Gowan Hewitt, who he had made one of those devices before, so he was also helping me along with that process. But in terms of the music creation, so I made the demos first. I self-produced the demos, and then at that point I knew I wanted to work with a group of singers, and we had this opportunity to perform at the Eden Project in January of 2022, maybe? I think it was 2022.
Was it as like a kind of launch for your EP, or was it before?
It was before I'd released it, but it was part of an Eden Project kind of experiment that they were doing, where they were figuring out if they could stream live music from the rainforest biome. So we sang in the rainforest biome, and like were dotted around different. They would move us like in a little go-kart from like part of the rainforest to the next, while there was someone who was like introducing the piece. So it was quite a cool experience, like seeing the songs in the biome and having it live streamed. But yeah, so I knew I wanted to work with a group of singers. So at the point of recording the EP for it to be released, I brought in this group who then did sing with me at the Eden Project. I made a little vocal booth in my bedroom. So at that stage I was living in Brockley in quite a small room, and I had a fold away bed, which I got for the purpose of like, I'm working from home, I want to be able to push away my bed and then work in there. But I soon realised I wasn't actually strong enough to do it on my own, which was so silly. So I just had this really uncomfortable futon bed for like 2 years that I only folded away for like this 1 week while I was recording vocals, and then just like would sleep in the booth and be like, I'm not folding it out for tonight.
Futons are the worst of both, aren't they?
Yeah. Not good.
Can vouch for
Bad back issues after that. But I decided I wanted to record it at home, and so I'd bring in the singers and record those parts. And then I worked with my housemate Liam Evans, who also releases his own music, and he co-produced it with me. And with some of the sort, like particularly Separation, which is the first track, there's a really cool drum beat in it that comes in halfway through. Separate on the way.
Yeah.
And that is a Liam Evans creation.
Very nice.
So it was really nice actually working with him, because he'd been in a band for quite a while and had always produced their tracks. And I think I was very used to, at that stage, like producing for podcasts or like making compositions for theatre, things that were more like maybe they would evolve over a longer period of time. But what I hadn't had as much experience was actually completing a song that was 3 to 5 minutes long and was a song, and it was, actually a finished piece. So it was really helpful working with him as someone who had produced and released quite a few tracks before, actually just having someone to bounce off of and bring it to the state that I wanted it at.
How was it thinking about actually putting this piece out there? Because you make the work, right? You're really excited making the work, but then it can kind of feel like a completely different process thinking about putting the work out there, especially if it does feel very you. It's like you're actually putting yourself out there. How was that for you?
Yeah, that was a real learning curve, and because I hadn't released music before this first EP and the singles that I released as part of it, and I was also self-releasing, so I had to learn a lot very quickly, and there's still so much that I'm learning about the process. So yeah, it made me realise this is a whole extra job. Like, as you say, like, you feel like the music's done. You're like, it's done. I've done it. Time to share
Completed
it. Fine. And then you go, oh no, I have to actually try and get people to listen to it. So that was a learning curve, and I think one of the big things people kept saying to me is like, don't worry about the statistics on release day. Like, release day is great and everything, but also it's what happens after that, and then going gigging and trying to perform the work and build an audience. And yeah, so that's been an interesting process, and I think also realizing just like all the ways that people want to get money out of you to put you on their playlist or get you onto a radio show. And it was there was a lot to navigate at the start of that, and be like, oh, what is actually worth doing? Is any of this actually worth doing?
Did you formulate a very concise plan, or did you just kind of use your nose to find your way?
Yeah, I definitely spent a good amount of time thinking about it, and I think that's because of the help from Sound of Music as well. Like, they were saying, have you thought about, making your own press release and sending it out to places? So I did quite a lot of prep for it, I'd say, but by the time I released it, I was quite exhausted. I think, like, it had been because it had been so new for me, this process. I think when it got to the release as well, and there's all the other stuff going on in your life, and also balancing all the other projects or jobs I was working on, I just found I had to not, because there's endless amounts of stuff you can do to push your music out there. I had to kind of be quite kind to myself and try and be like, it's okay if I, only email one person about it today, or just trying to do a little bit every day was quite helpful. And I've heard someone call it like, what is your needle pusher for today? Like, what is the one thing you can do to like push the needle towards what your goal is or what your vision is? And I found that to be such a useful concept. Like, what is the one thing I can do today to kind of further that dream? And it might just be email someone about doing a gig somewhere, or it might be something a lot bigger, like write a funding application, or and I found that to be so helpful when, as a freelancer, working on loads of different projects and actually making the time to prioritize your own work as well.
So it can be overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I like that idea though of it can be something very small, but often I find anyway, once I actually start and do a small thing, I feel quite motivated or empowered to like do another thing.
Definitely.
But then sometimes it is just like, I'm going to do that one thing and then crawl back into bed.
Yeah.
It's nice to give yourself that permission sometimes. What about, so there are some really cool music videos that you've got in relation to the EP, and in particular this animation video, which I don't know if people know, but animation is famously expensive and hard to do. So what's the story behind that, and sort of at what stage did you manage to get people to do that?
Yeah, so this animation was created by these two brothers who have their company's called Studio Gruff. And it was a mix of, they were also at a stage where they were building up their portfolio, trying to get into the animation world. They're so amazing and self-taught, I'm pretty sure. Like, they've just taught themselves how to animate and illustrate. And I think just it was the mix of having some funding from Sound Music and some other grants, and then they were at a stage where they were like, yeah, we would love to do this project, and kindly at a reduced rate, because
Wow.
yeah, animation is so expensive. So it was just like a good moment to kind of find each other. And they made this. I'd seen the stuff they'd done before and basically said, like, make whatever inspires them from this. I gave them maybe some prompts, but they just went away and they did a couple of initial drawings just to check, like, is this okay, this tone? And the song that they made it for is this song called Separation, which was about the, like, split of animal and plant cells, and this idea that 50% of our DNA is the same as a tree, which is crazy.
That's
And
mad.
yeah, and how we're all kind of linked in this evolutionary web. So that's what the song is about. And they took this and made this really surreal, quite trippy video of like kind of the evolution. One of the inspirations was like the Simpsons like intro where it's Homer Simpson like going through the evolutionary process, and it starts off with these blobs in the ocean and then they kind of evolve, and there's these quite weird moments where it actually has our faces, the six singers, our faces like attached to these animal hybrid monsters. But it's so cool and
Sounds creepy, but it's actually not.
and it's almost like Dali-esque feel to it, like where it just is very surreal. And yeah, it was just so cool seeing them make that, and I found that to be such a fun process of making music, is like kind of assembling your Avengers team of like, this is the person I really would love to make the artwork or the music video. I found that to be such a fun process.
And then recently you released a song called it's about being in your room, and is it the broccoli room, the small room, Life in Cities?
Yes,
that's it.
Life in cities now, sleep no more, stare out my window till the break of dawn.
And it's an incredible music video for that as well. I was watching it the other day and I was like, I think this might be one of my favourite music videos ever. Like, it's so good.
That's cool.
Yeah, how on earth did that happen?
Yeah, so that was made by someone called Edie Morris, and we've been kind of following each other for a while, and there's been a few times we've tried to work together, like we've done some applications to places and it just never has quite happened. And so Edie's one of those people who I'm like, I just really want to work with her, and she has this amazing aesthetic she makes video kind of collage animations, but also makes costumes, and also sometimes like the sets at festivals, like the stage sets.
Right.
And a lot of her work is really inspired by folklore, like British folklore, and it just feels very otherworldly as well. And so it quite often has these monsters in it, and those don't feature in the video we made. But I'm like, if I can make another video with her one day, I feel like it'd be so cool to have some weird kind of creature in it. But the video that she made is... So the idea of the song is it's about life in cities, as is the title. And I made it while I was living in Brockley in this house share, and my room would look over the garden, which for for like the rent we were paying was like a lovely garden, like quite large, and it was the first time in my adult life that I grew a connection with like a patch of land and saw how over those 2 years it changed, and how from one summer to the next it wasn't the same, and like you'd see one year the sycamore tree that was quite near the house, like it self-seeded loads of sycamore like saplings into the garden. So suddenly it's like, what? It was the first time I was also going like, what is this plant? Like I have no idea what this is, and got a plant ID app, and then learning, oh, that's a sycamore sapling, that's cool. And so it just got me thinking about city life and like how that probably is I probably won't have a garden like that for a while, probably not in London. And yeah, it just made me think about what that means, and particularly as more and more people move to cities, what is the kind of effect of like not having access to space like that, and the feeling of like ownership. And even though we were renting, just like it was such a nice feeling being like, oh, I can go out, I can go in there, I can plant whatever, and I can go out in my pajamas and have a cup of tea in the morning or something like that before I start work. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily explicitly come through in the song, I don't think, that idea, but it's definitely what inspired it. And just having, there's a line in it that goes, my piece of sky won't pretend for you. And yeah, it's just like being in that space and being able to look up at the sky and seeing how it just changed over, like from day to day, from morning to evening. And yeah.
I think a lot of your lyrics are quite like they can be interpreted in two ways or more, infinite ways. So it's interesting when you were talking about separation sort of being this purely scientific almost thing, and I was like, oh, I was interpreting it in a bunch of like human ways, which is interesting. I think it is testament to that link. And you do paint really lovely metaphors, even if you're not aware you're doing it. But I think it's nice that, you can write about something that occurs in nature, and then that be something that you can apply to emotion or relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one of the big things from the understory was the last song on the EP is called Symbiosis, and it's kind of a love letter to plants, which sounds quite weird, but it talks about that idea of that interconnectedness, and the flow from like the soil and the air we breathe and everything like that.
I've always known the breeze that carries you to me.
And I wanted it to be, I guess I wanted to challenge myself to be like, what would a love song to a plant sound like, or making songs that maybe aren't obviously about plants or about the environment. Hopefully that can just be enjoyed as a song, and can be applied to all sorts of situations. And
I particularly got that from Growth as well, actually. I'm thinking Growth is a line like, sister, I can't, a character that's very restless. And
Sister, I cannot choose stillness like you.
And I was like, yeah, I really feel that on a personal level. I could relate to those lyrics, but I don't know what they're about.
yeah. Well, that's great. That's good. And I think I think it can be so hard to make a song about the environment or climate change that like isn't on the nose, or I think that was something that was important to me too, is I wanted to make something that I thought was beautiful, and I hoped other people would think was that too, or like at moments was maybe a bit abrasive. And it's more about, hopefully, if people listen to it multiple times, those messages start to come through, but it not being maybe overly stated. Yeah.
So I want to ask about sort of the future and what you've got planned, where you're heading. Do you have any work in the pipeline right now that you're excited about?
Yeah, I do. I've got a couple of songs that. So I've started collaborating with my friend Jacob, he's in my band, and we wrote a song together maybe a year or so ago, and we've slowly been producing that, and we got my friend Tom to come on and do some strings, and that is just a plain old kind of breakup song. And it's so nice actually just being like, yeah, we're just making this song that we think is really nice, and it's just like, it's very acoustic. We set ourselves some limitations where we're like, it's so easy to put on so many synths or so many different sounds. And we were like, actually, we want this to be really, I guess, really acoustic and quite lush in like the violins, and just really be like be about the harmonies in our two voices like interacting. So that's exciting. So we're hoping to release it maybe in the next couple of months. We need to finish it and think about artwork and all that stuff. But
who's playing violin? Do you play violin?
No, it's my friend Tom.
Okay.
Yeah, I would love to play violin. I feel like, so one of my big inspirations is Dirty Projectors, which is this band that I started listening to when I was maybe 15 or 16. And it's just been this band that is led by someone called David Longstreth. And just over the last 11 years or so, like it's just been a band that keeps coming back to me, and there's always a handful of songs on each album where I'm like, these songs are just so good, and they have that mix of like acoustic and very folky harmonies, but also these quite cool electronic parts and violin parts that are quite ethereal or almost orchestral sometimes. And yeah, I feel like I would love to make music that hopefully makes people feel the same way. So I think that's always what I'm kind of aiming for, not to like copy what he's doing, but more just create a similar feeling, I think, because yeah, I think there's a timelessness to his music as well.
And I think there's more than one way to create a feeling.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, if you know what the feeling you're going for, you can kind of curate your own recipe, which is fun.
Yes. Yeah.
And also kind of, how do you feel about straddling, I don't know, not being boxed in by genre or sound world? Like, yes, I'm going to have some orchestral instruments, strings, and do you kind of view it as these are all different colours and I'm painting with whatever?
Yeah, and I think increasingly I want to find ways to bring more of my field recording work in. I think there was a little bit where I was thinking, am I restricting myself by just making music about the environment? And I think it's been nice, like, being able to step away from that a little bit, or just having it as kind of a motif through the work I do make. And like, it is a very important part of my life, and I think for me at the moment that's coming through a lot through field recordings. So I work on this podcast called As the Season Turns, which each month I go to a different place in the UK and kind of create this sonic scrapbook almost of this location. So I walk through the location or go on some kind of journey and just collect field recordings along the way.
I think what's so cool and exciting is that I kind of have no idea what to expect from you. And do you feel like that, or do you have more of a sense of, okay, I'd love to do this? Do you have goals?
It's when, at the end of the year, I was like, I should probably do like a day. I always mean to like do a day where I think about what I want to do next. And I've had various mentors be like, make time for yourself to have those moments. And one of the things I found really useful is I try to journal quite often, and I found that's just such a useful way to get ideas out, or just like personal stuff out, and see what's going on in my brain, particularly when like the world is so distracting with social media and everything. It's so easy to lose that dialogue with yourself, I think. But do I have goals? I I haven't got round to this day yet. And now I'm like, oh no, it's like halfway through January. Like, maybe I'll just wait another year. But I definitely have like these goals in my head that I'm like, I know I want to make more music. And it's more of a sense of like in the last year, I've really enjoyed having a band. Like this is the first time I've been in a band and performing together, and I've really enjoyed working with friends to produce these tracks and get them out there. And towards the end of last year, I just was like, I want to, whatever I can do to make this more of a reality and something I do more often, I want to do it. And yeah, I think
it's crazy it's only been a year. I mean, in my head, I still can't quite grapple with that fact, and it must be a little bit like you need to process the last year and sort of, and then set your eyes on, okay, this is what I want to do, and because it has happened all quite quickly, I suppose.
And I think it's been a while in the making, because I look back at my diary from 2022, and my goals, I did write 2 goals for that year, and one was to release an EP and the other one was to create a live set. And I didn't do them till 2023, but it's nice actually looking back at that and realising another thing I've really learnt over the last 5 or 6 years of being self-employed is just like you plant seeds and the results might not come to fruition straight away. Like things happen 2 years down the line or 3 or 4 years down the line, and suddenly you go, oh yeah, like this is now the right time for that thing to come through. So I found that to be really helpful. And yeah, just thinking about goals, like it's also, I want to, with the audio stuff and the field recording, I think I want to explore that more, and the like making my own radio pieces, things like that, stuff that bridges, like maybe has more of the context of the environmental stuff that maybe can't come through in just a song, actually exploring that and like getting other people's voices on it.
I would listen to your show 100%.
I called it. Yeah, I think like what I've discovered through this year with the podcast I'm working on, with the January episode, it was this standalone like 10-minute episode. So the evolution of that is now I interview someone locally to the landscape I'm kind of recording, and to bring in that human element. Like the thing I've realised, it's so difficult to do field recording in the UK and get like a pristine sound, because that just doesn't exist. Like there's so many, like, it's an island, there are so many cars, planes, everything. Like you can't, I think it would be sort of naive to like erase the human from that. So to actually interview someone and actually see how our local people in this particular landscape interacting with the environment, and what changes are they noticing, like I talked to these farmers and they were saying like the first year they were farming the landscape, everything was so stable, they knew when they could get the hay, or like they knew when things would germinate. And then in recent years it's like they have to water in April, and they're like, April showers, like where's the rain? Right. And there aren't any frosts in November, so that impacts like the vegetables and everything. And yeah, it's fascinating hearing from someone who has such a direct relationship with the land.
Yeah, and how all those changes are affecting them directly, but also how they indirectly affect us as well as an extension.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing where this goes, where your work goes, and it's been really fascinating to talk with you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.